The morning was heavy with suspense as people crowded outside York Castle on March 20th, 1809. Against the gloomy Yorkshire sky, 3 wooden gallows stood ready, and among those sentenced to die was a woman whose very name had become a source of dread throughout the region. Mary Bateman, infamously known as the Yorkshire Witch, stood on the execution platform, clutching a small child in her arms, a last desperate effort to postpone her fate that had failed only hours before. As the executioner tightened the rope around her neck, the crowd below grew silent. This was not just any criminal about to meet justice. This was a woman who had convinced countless people that she could communicate with spirits, foresee the future, and remove curses with her mysterious concoctions. But behind this mask of mystical powers was something far more sinister, a cold-blooded predator, who had spent years perfecting the art of deception and murder. When the trapdoor opened and Mary Bateman fell to her death, it signaled the end of one of England's most cunning serial killers. Her body would later be displayed for the public, attracting more than 2,500 people who came to witness the remains of the woman who had haunted Yorkshire for nearly 30 years. But how did a girl from a seemingly respectable family become one of Britain's most notorious female murderers? Before we unravel this astonishing tale, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the twisted stories we have in store. Let's go back to 1768, in the quiet village of Arsonby near Thirsk in North Yorkshire. Mary Harker was born into what looked like a respectable, middle-class family. Her father was a farmer, and by the standards of rural England, the Harker household was comfortable and stable. Nothing in Mary's early life hinted at the darkness she would one day bring. Yet, even as a child, she showed signs of the traits that would later define her criminal path. By the time she was 12, locals described her as having a knack for stealing. Neighbors in North Yorkshire learned to keep a watchful eye on young Mary, fully aware of her tricks and schemes. She had an uncanny ability to manipulate those around her, using her charm and cleverness to get whatever she wanted. Mary's journey, from petty thief to serial killer, didn't happen overnight. It was a slow transformation that started with small acts of fraud and theft, gradually escalating to murder. She was undeniably intelligent, able to read and write at a time when many women could not. And she had a sharp understanding of human nature, which she would later use to her advantage. As Mary grew into her teenage years, it became clear that her comfortable upbringing had done little to teach her right from wrong. She realized that people would believe almost anything if it was delivered with enough confidence and authority. This insight became the foundation of her criminal methods. The young woman who would become known as the Yorkshire Witch was already learning how to prey on the fears and superstitions of those around her. In an age when belief in witchcraft and the supernatural was still common, Mary found her calling. She would spend the next 30 years honing her ability to exploit human vulnerability, leaving a trail of victims behind her. In 1788, at the age of 20, Mary Harker married John Bateman, a wheelwright from the village of Bramley near Leeds. The marriage seemed to offer Mary a chance at respectability, but it quickly became just another tool in her growing criminal enterprise. John Bateman was described by those who knew him as a hard-working but simple man, easily manipulated by his increasingly dangerous wife. From the very start of their marriage, Mary used their home as the headquarters for her schemes. She began by selling what she claimed were magical potions and remedies to women in nearby villages. Her customers were mostly working-class women, desperate for solutions to their problems, whether it was infertility, illness, or troubled marriages. Mary had a remarkable talent for spotting these vulnerabilities and exploiting them for her own gain. Her reputation as a wise woman began to spread throughout the Leeds area. She claimed to have supernatural abilities that allowed her to speak with spirits, predict the future, and cast or remove curses. These claims were carefully crafted to appeal to the superstitions of her time, when many people still believed that unexplained misfortunes were caused by supernatural forces. But Mary's criminal activities went far beyond her fake spiritual services. She was involved in numerous thefts, often targeting the homes of her own clients. She would visit under the guise of offering magical help, then quietly steal valuable items. Her victims were often too embarrassed to report these crimes, since doing so would mean admitting they had sought out supernatural assistance. The birth of her children only seemed to give Mary more opportunities for crime. She would use her role as a mother to gain the trust of other women, presenting herself as someone who understood their struggles and fears. This maternal image was especially effective when targeting vulnerable women dealing with pregnancy, childbirth, or the loss of a child. As Mary's confidence grew, so did the scale of her criminal activities. she began to dabble in even riskier ventures, including the illegal practice of performing abortions. This was extremely dangerous in Georgian England, where the procedure was both illegal and life-threatening. But it gave Mary access to a new group of desperate clients willing to pay large sums for her services. The line between fraud and murder started to blur as Mary's operations became more sophisticated. She learned that dead clients couldn't expose her, and she began to see murder not as a moral failing, but as a practical solution to her problems. This cold logic would shape her approach to killing for the rest of her criminal career. By the early 1800s, Mary Bateman had become one of the most feared figures in the Leeds area. Her reputation as the Yorkshire witch had spread far beyond her immediate neighborhood, drawing clients from all over the region. With this wider reach came even more opportunities for her to commit violence. Mary's methods were both clever and ruthless. She would usually start by slowly building trust with her victims, sometimes over weeks or even months. She'd offer small favors or make accurate predictions about minor events, convincing people that she truly had supernatural powers. Once she had gained their trust, she would begin to demand more money and introduce more dangerous elements into her schemes. One of her most successful tactics was to claim that her clients were suffering under a powerful curse that could only be lifted with expensive remedies. She would give them potions and powders, insisting these would break the curse. But in reality, these substances often contained poison. As her victims grew sicker, Mary would explain that this was simply the curse fighting back against her efforts. During this time, Mary was responsible for many deaths that were never officially linked to her. Medical knowledge was limited, and many of her victims' deaths were blamed on natural causes or mysterious illnesses. Mary had become skilled at choosing poisons that mimicked common diseases, making it nearly impossible for authorities to suspect foul play. Her husband, John, remained mostly unaware of the full extent of Mary's crimes, though he certainly knew something was wrong. Neighbors would later say that John seemed increasingly afraid of his wife, and rumors spread that Mary had threatened to poison him if he ever revealed her secrets. The couple's finances improved dramatically during this period, but no one questioned where their newfound wealth came from. Mary was making a lot of money from her various criminal activities, and she was careful to keep up appearances. She dressed well, kept a tidy home, and was known to donate to local charities when it suited her needs. Mary's criminal network also began to grow beyond her immediate family. She recruited several accomplices to help her with different parts of her operations, from getting poisoned to hiding evidence. These helpers were usually people who were either completely under her control, or who had their own criminal backgrounds and were easy to manipulate. Looking at Mary Bateman's psychological profile during this time, it's clear she had moved far beyond simple greed. She showed no remorse for her victims and even seemed to enjoy their suffering. People who met her described her as charming and intelligent when it suited her, but capable of shocking cruelty if she was crossed. The case that would eventually bring Mary Bateman to justice began in early 1806, when she met William and Rebecca Perego of Bramley. William was a poor clothier struggling to make ends meet, while Rebecca was a woman plagued by anxiety and superstition. The couple were perfect targets for Mary's particular brand of manipulation. Mary's first approach to the Peregos was subtle and calculated. She presented herself as someone who had heard about their troubles and wanted to help. She claimed to have supernatural abilities that could improve their finances and protect them from harm. Rebecca, especially, was quickly drawn in by Mary's confident claims. Over several months, Mary visited the Peregos regularly, bringing them small gifts and potions that she said would bring good luck. At first, she charged only modest fees for her services, setting up a pattern of payment that would slowly increase. Mary's strategy with the Peregos followed her usual pattern: build trust, then introduce more dangerous elements. She began to tell Rebecca that she was under a powerful curse that was blocking the couple's prosperity. According to Mary, this curse could only be lifted through a series of expensive and complicated rituals. The first step in Mary's plan was to convince the Peregos to hand over their savings, which she said needed to be blessed before it could be returned. She performed elaborate ceremonies with the money, all the while secretly swapping their real coins for worthless tokens. The Peregos were too trusting to check the money carefully, and Mary walked away with everything they had saved. But Mary's plans for the Peregos didn't stop at theft. She decided they were becoming too familiar with her methods and could become a threat to her operations. She began to plot their elimination, starting with Rebecca, whom she saw as the more vulnerable target. In the spring of 1807, Mary told Rebecca that the curse afflicting her was growing stronger and that more drastic action was needed. She gave Rebecca a series of powders, claiming these would finally break the curse. In reality, the powders contained a carefully measured dose of poison, designed to kill Rebecca slowly and make her death look like it was from natural causes. Rebecca began taking the powders as instructed and soon became violently ill. She suffered severe stomach pains, vomiting, and weakness that only got worse over several days. William grew more and more worried about his wife's condition, but Mary convinced him that these symptoms were proof the curse was being broken. Mary's behavior during Rebecca's final illness showed just how cruel she could be. She visited the Perrigo home every day, supposedly to check on Rebecca's progress, but really to see how well her poison was working. She showed no sympathy for Rebecca's suffering and kept encouraging her to keep taking the deadly powders. Rebecca Perrigo died on May 16, 1807, after days of terrible pain. At first, her death was blamed on natural causes, but William's growing suspicions about Mary's involvement would eventually lead to a full investigation. The case that would finally bring the Yorkshire witch to justice was beginning to take shape. William Perrigo's grief over losing his wife was mixed with a deepening suspicion about Mary Bateman's role in Rebecca's death. Several things made him uneasy: the timing of Rebecca's illness, the strange nature of her symptoms, and Mary's constant presence in their home during Rebecca's last days. William started to dig into Mary's background, talking to neighbors and others who had crossed paths with her. What he found was alarming. Many families shared similar stories. Mary would first promise help, then demand money, and soon after, someone in the family would fall mysteriously ill or even die. The turning point came when William discovered that the money Mary had claimed to bless for them had been swapped out for worthless tokens. This clear evidence of fraud gave him the courage to go to the authorities with his suspicions about his wife's death. The investigation into Mary Bateman's activities soon revealed just how far her criminal enterprise reached. Authorities learned that she had been using multiple aliases throughout the Leeds area, targeting vulnerable families with her fake spiritual services. The pattern was always the same: she'd build trust, escalate her demands for money, and then, if her victims became inconvenient, they would fall ill or die under mysterious circumstances. At first, there wasn't much physical evidence against Mary. She had been careful to destroy most traces of her crimes. Still, investigators found several bottles of suspicious substances in her home, some of which were later identified as containing poison. They also found detailed records Mary had kept of her various schemes, apparently to keep track of her profits. The testimony of witnesses became crucial in building the case. Multiple people came forward to share how Mary had tricked them or their loved ones. Several described her methods in detail: her claims of supernatural powers, her systematic way of extracting money, and the strange illnesses that followed her visits. Medical experts were brought in to examine the circumstances of Rebecca Perrigo's death. Even though medical knowledge was limited at the time, they were able to spot signs that pointed to poisoning rather than a natural illness. Rebecca's symptoms matched those caused by certain toxic substances that Mary was known to have. The investigation also uncovered evidence linking Mary to other suspicious deaths in the region. While she would only be charged with Rebecca's murder, authorities identified at least 6 other cases where Mary's clients had died soon after receiving her treatments. Mary's arrest happened on a cold morning in late 1807 when the constable arrived at her door with a warrant. She showed no surprise, almost as if she had been expecting it. She remained calm during her arrest, a composure she would keep throughout her trial, always projecting an image of confidence and control. As word of Mary's arrest spread, more victims and witnesses came forward. The full extent of her crimes became clear: a network of fraud, theft, and murder that had lasted nearly 20 years. The woman who had terrified Yorkshire was finally behind bars, but the legal battle that would decide her fate was just beginning. Mary Bateman's trial began on March 18, 1809, at York Castle. The case drew huge crowds from all over the region. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see the woman who had become a legend of evil in Yorkshire. Mary herself appeared calm and collected, keeping up the confident demeanor that had served her so well in her criminal life. The prosecution's case relied mainly on the testimony of William Perrigo and the evidence surrounding Rebecca's death. William gave a detailed account of Mary's involvement in his wife's final illness, including how she had given Rebecca the powders that made her so sick. His emotional story about watching his wife suffer and die was especially powerful for the jury. Medical experts testified about Rebecca's symptoms and how they matched those caused by poisoning. Even though their knowledge was limited, they could show that Rebecca's death was not natural. The timing and progression of her illness fit the effects of several poisons Mary was known to use. The prosecution also presented evidence of Mary's fraud, like how she had swapped the Perigos savings for worthless tokens. This clear theft helped prove Mary's criminal intent and her systematic way of targeting her victims. Mary's defense was mostly about denying the specific charges while insisting she really did have supernatural abilities. She claimed her treatments were meant to help Rebecca, not harm her, and that any bad effects were just the curse fighting back. The defense also tried to paint Mary as a victim of superstition and prejudice, saying she was being prosecuted for witchcraft, not murder. There was some truth to this, since public opinion was heavily influenced by fear of her supposed powers. When Mary took the stand in her own defense, she showed just how manipulative she could be. She spoke with confidence and authority, trying to convince the jury she was a genuine spiritual healer who had been wrongly accused. Her performance was impressive, but it wasn't enough to overcome the evidence against her. The jury took less than an hour to reach a verdict: guilty of murdering Rebecca. The speed of their decision showed just how strong the evidence was and how horrifying Mary's crimes had been. When the verdict was read, Mary showed no emotion, keeping her composure even as she faced execution. Judge Baron Thompson, who presided over the trial, gave a long speech that reflected the public's fascination with the case. He called Mary a woman of rare depravity who had used her intelligence and charm to prey on the innocent. He sentenced her to death by hanging, a punishment that was both expected and welcomed by the public. Mary's reaction to her death sentence was, as always, calculated. She immediately claimed to be pregnant, which would have delayed her execution until after the birth of her child. Medical experts investigated and found she was not pregnant. Her last attempt to escape justice had failed. Mary Bateman's final days in York Castle revealed even more about her character. According to those who saw her during this time, she remained astonishingly calm and composed, never showing any sign of regret for her actions. She continued to insist on her innocence, claiming that she was being put to death for witchcraft rather than for murder. During her last weeks, Mary received many visitors, including members of the clergy who tried to persuade her to confess and seek forgiveness. She spoke with them politely but refused to admit to any wrongdoing, frustrating those who hoped she might finally reveal the full truth about her crimes. Her husband, John, visited her regularly, often bringing their children so they could see their mother one last time before her execution. These visits were said to be emotional for John, who struggled to understand how the woman he had married could have become a notorious killer. Mary's interactions with her children were described as affectionate but distant, as if she was already separating herself from her family and the world. She was about to leave behind. As the day of her execution drew closer, public interest in Mary's case only grew. Newspapers across England reported every new development, and crowds began to gather in York, eager to witness the end of the Yorkshire witch. The idea of a woman being executed for murder was rare enough to attract attention from far and wide. Mary spent her last days writing letters to various people, including some of her former clients. The contents of these letters were never fully revealed, but they were said to include continued claims of innocence and concern for her family's future. She also wrote to her husband, asking him to care for their children and to remember her as she had been in the early years of their marriage. On the morning of March 20, 1809, Mary was prepared for her execution. She wore a white gown, as was the tradition for condemned women, and was allowed to hold her infant child as she was led to the gallows. Her final attempt to delay her execution by claiming pregnancy had failed, and she faced her death with the same composure she had shown throughout her trial. Thousands of people from across Yorkshire gathered to watch the execution. Mary showed no fear as she climbed the scaffold, and her last words were reported to be another declaration of her innocence. When the trapdoor opened and Mary Bateman fell, it marked the end of one of England's most infamous criminal careers. But her story did not end there, as the public's fascination with her life and crimes continued long after her death. After her execution, Mary's body was put on public display at York Castle. More than 12,500 people came to see the remains of the Yorkshire witch, a grim spectacle that reflected the public's need to see proof that the woman who had terrorized the region was truly gone. In a practice that seems shocking today, strips of Mary's skin were tanned into leather and sold as souvenirs to visitors. Some believed these gruesome tokens had protective powers, a final irony for a woman who had claimed to offer protection through her own charms and potions. Mary's execution had a profound effect on her family. Her husband John was left to raise their children alone, burdened by the shame of being married to one of England's most notorious criminals. The children would spend their lives marked by their mother's crimes, and what became of them is largely lost to history. The case also had a wider impact on how suspected witches were treated in England. Mary's trial was one of the last times that claims of supernatural powers played a major role in a criminal case. Her execution marked the end of the era of witch trials in England, showing that such cases could be prosecuted as ordinary crimes rather than as matters of superstition. The story of Mary Bateman became part of Yorkshire folklore, retold and embellished over the generations. She became a warning about the dangers of superstition and the need to be cautious of those who claim supernatural abilities. Modern analysis suggests that Mary was likely responsible for far more deaths than the single murder for which she was convicted. Her methods were sophisticated and her approach was systematic, indicating that she had been killing for profit for many years before she was finally caught. Her case also sheds light on the social conditions of early 19th century England, where poverty, superstition, and limited medical knowledge created the perfect environment for predators like Mary to thrive. Her victims were mostly working-class women with few resources and little access to real help for their problems. Mary Bateman's transformation from a comfortable middle-class childhood to one of England's most notorious serial killers is a chilling example of how intelligence and charm can be twisted for evil purposes. Her story is a timeless reminder that true monsters often hide behind friendly faces and promises of help. The Yorkshire witch's reign of terror lasted nearly 30 years, during which she systematically preyed on the fears and vulnerabilities of her victims. Her methods were clever, her approach was cold and calculating, and she showed no remorse for her actions. She represents a type of criminal that exists in every era, the predator who uses trust as a weapon. The case of Mary Bateman also highlights the importance of critical thinking and skepticism when faced with extraordinary claims. Her victims were not foolish, but desperate and vulnerable people who wanted to believe in easy solutions to their problems. More than 2 centuries after her execution, Mary Bateman's story still fascinates and horrifies those who hear it. She remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the terrible consequences that can result when intelligence is combined with a complete lack of conscience. The Yorkshire witch may be long dead, but her legacy endures as a reminder that evil can come from the most unexpected places, and that the most dangerous predators are often those who seem to be offering help. Thank you for watching. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this one.